What's up, y'all, and welcome to Durag Thoughts. My name is Trevor Went. I'm a visual artist raised in Virginia Beach, Virginia. I make art to challenge perspectives and give hope to the marginalized and oppressed. And this space, Durag Thoughts, is a space where we talk about topics and conversations that challenge perspectives and give hope to the marginalized and oppressed. And we've been rocking through my project and series, City of God, for the last couple of weeks. And I hope y'all paid attention to that. If you didn't see the video that dropped on Monday, Silent Stream, you should probably go and watch that before you listen to this, because there will be spoilers. But we're going to just talk about some conversations and themes that surround that piece. And so I hope you enjoy this conversation. My conversation partner for today is one of my good friends that I met a couple of years ago in seminary. He has a master's of arts in religion, is one of the most thoughtful individuals that I've met over the last couple of years, and has been someone who, has been an integral part of some of these stories that I met amidst a lot of the stories that include my space and time in seminary. He is someone that has rivaled me in style, which is a difficult thing to do. And yes, I know this. Is just a loving, giving person, someone that challenges me to be better, to think better, and just to love people well. And so I've been enriched by our friendship, and excited for the years to come, and excited for this conversation for us today. And so I want to introduce y'all to my friend, Kalvin Cummings. What's up, Cal?
What's up, Trev? How you living, man?
Dog, I'm chilling. Grinding through all this stuff, man. It's been a lot to get to this process, and then this piece specifically. It's like there's so much that surrounds this story and stuff like that. So just rocking through the edits and stuff at this point. We're recording this stuff pre-rollout of the record, and so getting to this point of production and like color work and reviewing this stuff and really kind of entrenching myself in these stories. I wouldn't say they're trauma inducing at this point, but I would say it's like dang, I really went through all this stuff. Like yeah. I really like came out on the other side of this, and like the time feels like, it feels like you're kind of in a time capsule. It's gone by really quickly, but sometimes you can feel certain things. It's like, dang, like that feels pretty visceral, kind of like trying to put yourself back into those emotions and those spaces of time. But
yeah, and also like it could also have happened yesterday. It's like that dualism between like it was 2 years ago, but it also is a very realized situation or circumstance that could have happened yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. So to kind of give people a background surrounding this story, so this piece, Silent Stream, surrounds a moment, and it's kind of a two-part piece. It's the only section of the project, of the series, that sits within two pieces within the same amount of time, like within a chronological day. It's not like anything else is like back-to-back day, like they're jumping time periods through each track. But this one is this track, and then the track that's to follow are right within the same space of time. And so I went to Emmanuel Christian Seminary, both Kalvin and I. That's where I met Kalvin, and we talked about that, like going to that school a little bit in the track Calvin Phillips Drive. But I went to Emmanuel Christian Seminary, and throughout that time, it was very interesting because when I moved in to the school, I remember there, like, somebody was putting together a kind of like meeting or something to like talk about racism, white supremacy, and how we can do better in the church and something like that. And I was like, yo, this is crazy, because I'm in Johnson City, Tennessee. I've been working in Bristol. I've known that like this area doesn't have a lot of diversity, doesn't have a lot of people of color. It's racist. A lot of racism pops out in this area all the time. And I've been like struggling within the environments that I've been in, the church I've been in, all this stuff within the context of the conversation of racism. And now I'm in this place where like people are saying, oh, we about to openly talk about this. So I was like, whoa. I mean, because Emmanuel is not diverse, you know?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, well, white people finna talk about racism? This is new. And so I was I was really thrown, but I was also like, yo, I feel like I'm actually in a spot that like is decent right now.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we're going through class, and it's the end of the first semester, and I was in Dr. Alolia's Introduction to Christian Theology class. And so we're at the end of the semester, and we had a final, but then we also had a like a 2-page paper, a 2-page like theological statement paper that we could write about anything that we learned, any sort of concept or whatever, right? And Kalvin had actually come in and sat in on this class, I guess out of the request of Dr. Alolia, because y'all are tight.
Yeah, Dr. Alolia asked me to sit in on the theological statements because he knew, like, I think when I started, I was so interested in theology because it is this like newer space for us in the Black church to imagine beyond like the very exilic things that we are like taught. There's like, oh, we get to ask questions, we get to think about these things. So anyways, he invited me to come. He's like, Kalvin, you should come listen to the theological statements. And boy, was that something to experience.
Yeah. And so like, you know, we had, I don't think you were there for mine, because I think I went way later. But so this one kid gets up, and like Kalvin had actually left by this time. And this, like, because Dr. Alolia's class would go for like, it was a 3-hour class, but that joint it would go for the full duration of the 3 hours, if not a little bit more. And you would be drained. And so, you know, people are reading these papers. Kalvin has to leave at some point, and this kid gets up who I had known, you know, because he was I mean, obviously the classes aren't that big, you know. Well, I can't say obviously, I don't know Emmanuel Christian Seminary, but the classes aren't big. Class sizes are not very big at all. And this is probably the biggest class I have, of probably like 20 people or so. And so if you've watched the video, you will see that it's not a massive classroom. It's not like you're in an auditorium and people are sitting in stadium type seating, you know. And so
it's about 25 to 30 students at most.
Yeah, at most, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm in this classroom, and this kid gets up that was within my formation group for my spiritual formation class, which was a group of 3 other students who you would just kind of have conversation with about what you're going through, where you're at spiritually and stuff like that. You know, within seminary, you're trying to still stay grounded while you're going through these difficult new topics, right? And one of the things that you would do was you would talk about, like, there was times where like you would just like give someone space to talk and you wouldn't comment on it or anything like that. You would just say it, right? And I remember one of these, this is prior to this theological statement paper issue. I had like, one of the students had asked me how I was doing because some other Black person had been murdered at this time. And it might have been Terrence Crutcher. But I remember getting asked, and then this student asking me how I was, and then the student that is the issue person within the Silent Stream narrative, he just starts like challenging and trying to debate my realities as a Black person. And you know, we also had the dynamic in that group where one of our friends had just come over for class, like just come over to school from Africa. And so he didn't have an understanding of American cultural context. So like when you're talking about, yo, America has this deep problem with racism, like he's challenging stuff because it's hard for him to believe that this is reality, because he's going to have to come to grips with the fact that he's Black in America. And just because he's African doesn't mean that he's going to get treated any better. He might even get treated worse because he's got an accent that people aren't going to understand as well. And so he was struggling with that, I think, while this white student was just being a racist. Um, and then, and so like kind of fast forward to this narrative within Silent Stream, he gets up to say a theological statement paper, and it's like the whole theme around it is like, I don't see love in them, is like the big thing that I kept hearing from him. And it was
And
just,
he meant, what did he mean? Who did he mean by them?
yeah, it's like, and that's the thing. It's like, and so if you peer into the piece, I say, and when he responded with answers of those akin to Black Lives Bodies and Native American activists, at the act of this, I sat unamused and unsurprised. The cataracts that cover his eyes are as clear to me as Aryan pride. It's like, he verbatim said, you know, people like Black Lives Matter and like Native Americans of the Dakota Access Pipeline, because this was at the same point in time where Native Americans were like protesting at the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Keystone Pipeline, trying to save their land from like government, you know, destruction of native land, of indigenous land that has been prevalent since the beginning of, you know, European occupation of America, and the terrorism that was done against indigenous peoples. And so I see this moment happen, right? And I turn up. And you know, I waited until he finished his thoughts, and then I went in on him. And then Dr. Alolia kind of questioned some things, but I don't know, the way Dr. Alolia questioned it, it didn't help. Like, because
he's stirring for theological reflection, engagement. Like, I think he's hoping that like we will figure that out. Well, students in turn will figure out by challenging each other. So
well, and then I think he tried to set him up to like to like see, and not in a good way. Like Dr. Alolia was trying to, like, good way for our side of things, of people who aren't racist, but bad for him. Like Dr. Alolia was questioning, like, have you ever experienced racism? Have you ever walked into a store and had this? And so he was trying to ask questions like that. And then the kid was like, well, yes, I have. And so then Dr. Alolia wasn't prepared for like him to say that. And so then he was kind of stuck with the, oh, I don't know what to do with this. But I'm like, I know what to do with this. And then I'm like laying into this kid and just like breaking down his arguments. And so I finally said, yo, no, I'm going to take a step back. I'm like, because I don't need to be the only person laying into this person. There's a classroom full of people. I'm not going to hog this entire questioning space. I'm going to allow all these students, other students who have like expressed solidarity and things like that, to speak up.
Yeah, and you can't be too angry about any type of injustice when it comes to African American people, because we can't be too angry. That's an option, an emotion that we know we're our skin is threatening, our gender is threatening, and so anger, what? We're guilty of everything at that point. So let me calm down. Let me give somebody else an opportunity to speak. You know?
Yeah, exactly. And so I take a step back and I wait for people to speak, and it is dead silent. Like you can hear a pin drop. It's deafening. It's like suffocating, because it's like, whoa, like all these people who've expressed solidarity, like this is a freaking layup. This is a soft pitch. This is I threw the ball up for myself and hit it with the freaking, bat, it was such an easy situation to call out racism, but it wasn't happening. And so,
and you were disarmed, Trevor. Like even you coming through the story right now, it reminds me of how you were introduced into the space. You were introduced into a seminary space that engaged this conversation for you. So you already come in disarmed and a whole lot more hopeful than you would normally be.
Yep.
And now to experience this right now, this easy opportunity to engage, and to see like it's met with silence.
Yeah. And I was double disarmed, because on my visit was a day where you were among a panel in chapel that was during Black History Month, that was, discussing conversations surrounding racism. And I'm like, this is the first time that I've ever been in a white Christian space that they're talking about racism, and this is wild. And so I'm thinking, this is different. Like, it has to be, because I ain't never seen nothing like this. I ain't never seen a white Christian space just give a stage to black people to say whatever they want in the space of racism. And like, in regards to those questions. Now, I didn't think I wasn't going to endure racism because I ain't stupid, but I didn't think in that environment, because I had already like identified this kid, like from the other conversation I talked about earlier. So I knew like this ish was going to pop off. Like I didn't know that theological statement thing was going to happen, but I knew like I would experience racism from him. And then, because I already had, and then in that moment, I'm disarmed, like you said, which I think is a really great thought, because I haven't thought about that ever in all the times and all the conversations we've had about this moment. And then he comes into the midst of that space and says those things, and then no one speaks. And so then all of a sudden, I mean, I don't remember how long that pause was, but you know, for a person like me in that scenario, it felt like an eternity. And then two white folks, Ben Carpenter and Zach McClellan, decided to speak up. And I think Zach might have spoken first and then Ben after, and they both questioned him in some strong ways. And you know, Ben's out ministering in Oregon, and then Zach is a minister up in like Baltimore area. He just accepted a new position, but he was on staff at Mountain Christian Church. And so I saw that play out, right?
Right.
And then it went back to like it went back to silence for a second, and then this one cat who I'd also kind of had some little spidey sense tingling about racism tried to like soften the dude's blow to make it feel like it was less than what it was. And then
wasn't it a woman?
Well, she came next. So
okay, my bad. I'm rushing you. Let me calm down.
It's all good. So this dude tries to soften the blow and make it seem like it's not what it is. And so, you know, see that happen. And then this woman comes in who is like champion of feminism, right? White girl,
yeah,
white woman.
Definitely true.
And she's a champion of feminism. And then she thanks this dude. She thanks this dude and says, basically, our classroom is filled with these, with these differing or these like same ideologies a lot of times. So thank you for bringing in a different perspective. And I'm like, what the hell? You just thank someone for being a racist. What is wrong with you? And so I was really leveled in that moment. And I had gotten a text from another homie in the class who was like, yo, and I hadn't seen it until I walked out, but he was like, I couldn't speak because I was like seeing red. And so he was so angry he couldn't like voice words. And that was like my experience in that space. That there was like very small pockets of solidarity, and I'm just like, none of y'all spoke. And it just nobody
said anything.
No one said anything, and it kind of like plays a larger narrative, right? Because it's like, to me, it just kind of it walks into the space of like performative solidarity, in one part, right? Because like there's a host of different things happening in that piece, which I don't want to break down for people, because I want y'all to interpret this art as, like take some time and like kind of process through it and let it breathe and live. I'm not going to give y'all a breakdown of the piece and everything I'm alluding to there. I want that art to have some life of its own, but I know for me, like that moment, there was a strong display of like performative solidarity in the past, because like at other times you're telling me you're in solidarity with me, but in this moment where this is a layup, this is easy, yeah. This is a clean shot to the fact that like this fool is racist, and this is so easy for you to call this out, and you did nothing. And I know that like you know, I've experienced stuff like that in a lot of spaces. Um,
Trevor, every time we talk about this and every time I think about it, I think I've reeled for so many years about like, what is it about this thing where like I'm noticing like this very audacious nature of these very idealistic leftist people, but when it deals with the issues of race, there it seems like that water's too murky to be as audacious, to be as like as vocal about what they know to be wrong. And it's because honestly, that's the thing. It's like you're communicating to me in silos, in text messages, that you know this is wrong. And I also have the data supporting that you will say something when it comes to like issues of environmental justice or issues of land cruelty or anything that feels outside of this racism conversation. But it just feels like this, it just, when it deals with matters of race, the water is murky. It just reminds me of like when James Baldwin says, I read this the other day, he says that white liberals love justice more than black people or something to that degree. I'm ruining the quote. But like, it honestly has been one of the things that I've like, even up until like a couple of days ago, I was like, it's something I still question. I don't understand it. And it's like, it's intolerable when you're sitting in a room knowing that the people around you are they're literally texting you, Trevor, like sending text messages to your phone, speaking up in ways that they know they felt the same tug, the same issues with the statement that somebody's made, but you're met with silence. It's met with silence.
yeah.
Defense. It's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I've said to people plenty of times, I mean, if you follow me on social media, you've probably seen this statement. There's no solidarity in silence.
Yeah.
There is none. Solidarity is a public action. You cannot have solidarity if you are going to be silent in the face of things that are mattering, like in the face of injustice and what's going down on this earth, like what's going down in the United States of America, right? And so
your peers failed to meet the moment. I think when you were talking about Trevor, I couldn't stop thinking about like how you were so benevolent and like giving the people that said these things to you, that represent these ideas, you were so benevolent in the space to like, maybe I don't have to say this. Maybe I'm not the one that needs to champion these like ideologies. Maybe I'm not the one that needs to say this. And you pulled back because there was hope there. And I think for me, it's like, I hate to acknowledge it, but that is hope. That's exactly what it is. And
it absolutely was hope.
Exactly. Like it's hope. And it's like the moment that you needed your brothers and your sisters around you to meet the moment and do something, like, create a counter narrative that is not silent. You were disappointed because honestly, when you tell this story, I love the way you're like, the way you're positioning it, because there is such a build up to like, you had tangible experiences to say like, these people have these priorities, like these people I know, these people that I'm meeting, even the institution that I've elected to be a part of, they know they have chosen these conversations. And then when the rubber meets the road, when the moment needs to happen,
they don't say anything.
Yeah.
They don't say anything. And that's the thing, man. It's like, I totally had hope because I was like, this is different. This space is so different. And it was hope in the future generation of pastors.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, this is a room filled with pastors and ministers and small group leaders and kids directors and, art directors and worship leaders and worship pastors, and all these different people are sitting in this room, right? In this area that needs an awakening. And I'm like, okay, maybe this place is different. Maybe this class is different. Maybe these people are different.
Yeah.
And I look
Trev, when you said that, I heard kinfolk. You know what I mean? Like you expected to be in a room with like people that believe that the gospel has certain non-negotiables. That like there are things that are just non-negotiable when it comes to the body of Christ. And
Yeah.
you sat in a room with people that you trusted or hoped to trust in, that those things wouldn't be a non-negotiable. It's not that you weren't waiting for some things to be corrected, because why would we go to seminary? We need to be corrected, critiqued, and all the different things. But you hope that you wouldn't have to be the only one in the room. And
Yeah.
that is wow. I've never really thought about like how it is. We do believe a lie of kinfolk. We come into, regardless of race, race is not the first thing we think about when we enter a space that is faith interested, spiritual in any type of way. There is some sameness that we kind of adopt or assume. I think that's what I heard when I was listening to it, and I also remember thinking the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it's like I see, Zach and Ben speak up, right? And it's like, dang, solidarity is still like a major minority, even in a progressive space, because Emmanuel is progressive. Like the theology that Emmanuel presents is a pretty progressive theology. And so I have a much less chance of seeing solidarity presented in an institution that is far more conservative, that is far more like right-leaning, which is just reality. Those spaces are a lot more detrimental. Like there's people like Kyle Howard who talk about how he wouldn't go on campus at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary because he just couldn't deal with like the racial trauma that he was going to deal with. And he's like just a couple classes away from an MDiv right now, like in their like language classes. And it's like, and he doesn't know if he's going to complete his MDiv because of that. Right. And it's like, and it's like, and me and Kyle Howard sit on very different like theological slants because I am far more progressive than he is. But the reality is, it's like this. I could not expect, a quote better environment to be in to experience solidarity, and then I found silence, like save a few, right? And so I see these two cats who decide to speak in the midst of that space, and I'm like, dang, we still out here rocking with a small few. We're still rocking out here with the couple who gonna show up at the March on Washington. Like even in a space that seems more, progressive and stuff has not progressed here. And like that's why like when people are like, oh, why are you making this bipartisan or whatever? I'm like, I'm not. There's racism on every side. You think you crazy if you think that I don't think that Bill Clinton and his administration created the 3 strikes law, like, mandatory minimums. I know a lot more about history than you think I do if you think that I only think that Republicans are racist, that I only think that right-leaning people are racist. And so, to allow racist systems to prevail is racism. Like to sit there in the face of seeing racism and to not speak up is a failure and is racism. And so there was so much of a hope, like, dang, like we gonna move this thing forward into a new future. And then I sit in that classroom and I watch those people be silent, and I experience that, and I'm like, oh, y'all don't give a damn. Like, y'all like, or you're not giving enough of a damn. Like, you don't. And I said this in my whole breakdown of like the George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor murders. If it's like I talked about, like if it took you seeing like a black man lynched in the street by white supremacists with a shotgun, right? Or it took hearing about Breonna Taylor getting killed in her own home while she was sleeping, while the police didn't identify themselves, or if it took George Floyd with a knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds for you to give a damn about black people, you're a part of the problem. And so if you can sit there in a classroom as a person holding power, like a minister is a person who holds power, a person who's given a distinction of a master's degree in something as important as faith, in religion, in the Bible, these concepts that go into the deepest part of a person's being, like these ideas that this is some embodiment of your spiritual being, something that we can't even see, right? And you get power endowed by a space like that, and you choose to turn a blind eye to racism. You don't give a damn about black people, and you're part of the problem. And I just think that is such a potent reality that like has to be wrestled with. But anyways,
But
yeah, man.
I think that Puritan, like, we never really, like, for me, it's been this very strong investigation of like, why is the church so like, what I know we talk about the Constantinian shift and we really talk about like how Christianity aligned with power, but we don't really think about like the settlement of this American soil. The settlement was predicated on those beliefs. They had to set the manifest destiny rested on the fact that Puritans were God's chosen people, and they had dominion over others, enslaved people. They were masters over the earth. And so when I do that, like, I have to dig deep, Trevor, because honestly, it doesn't make sense. The apathy, when you feel it in the space, you don't know what to do with it. You're like, I can never in my life be this like cruel. It feels just like a whole level of different of evil that I can't wrap my brain around. Like, and I have only been able to come out on the other side to understand that like whiteness plays this game with racism that it's a dangerous game. And to come too harsh on their brothers and sisters that share their skin, it is something that is threatening to their own bodies. And I think that like there is so much fragility in that. To point a finger at somebody that is white and racist might mean that finger could be pointed back at them. And I think there's so much fragility there that I can't understand. So like for me, that's what I've done with it. But it's like there's just so many interlocking things when I think about like, why can I sit in a classroom with a group of people that are well educated in some sense? Like this is higher education at this point, regardless of it being a seminary, regardless of it being all these other things. We're at a point to where we've studied enough to be well-read individuals and to still make so many sacrifices in human worth for the sake of our own selves, for the sake of not being called racist. It just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like we remembered that the whole reason we went into seminary was to figure out how do we spread whatever good news is, right? Like whatever good news is to us and however we've come to what that means.
Yeah.
If the point was to share that, then how did it become exclusionary?
Yeah. It's a painful space because if you know American history or US American history, I've said this in another podcast episode, but I'm really trying to be intentional to say US American because America is a lot more than the US, and them telling us to call the US just America, I feel like is some American exceptionalism type ish. Yeah. But yeah, I think if you know US American history, you know that like you're talking about like Puritans, like Propaganda has a line on a song called Precious Puritans. He's like, they were chaplains on slave ships, right? Like, would you quote Cortez to Cherokees? Like, or like, what is it? Or it's like, maybe it's Cortez to Aztecs, but he was like, would you quote Columbus to Cherokees? Would you quote Cortez to Aztecs, even if their theology was good? That just screams of blind privilege, wouldn't you say? But we're talking about like Christianity was used as a tool by white people to tell black people that their place was to be enslaved. Like it was slaves, obey your masters, slave, like do this, your place, like your rightful place is under us, this, that, and the third. And so like innately because of that, there is a massive amount of work that needs to be done to stand against the white supremacy that is inherently within the space of, American Christian, like white American Christian spaces, and white evangelical Christian spaces. Like it's got a flawed root, man. It's got a flawed root. It's a corrupt route from the jump. Like, you're working backwards. You're the people who came before you, faith leaders, like, some of these fools own slaves, cuh. Like, a lot of these fools ain't say nothing, ain't stand up for nothing. Like, these are the people you gotta work against. Like, this is the stuff you gotta work against. You gotta see how this stuff is playing out in your environment. And I see this sort of stuff played out even in situations where, like, my experience has been tried, like, people have tried to minimize my experience in different church experiences. When I talk about the racism I'm experiencing, oh, would they, like, gaslighting me? Like, oh, did they really mean that? Like, oh, have you talked to them about that? And, like, people who don't know what gaslighting is, it's like you're trying to say things to, like, manipulate and act as if this person doesn't know what they're talking about in the space of what they've experienced, right? Whether that's a woman talking about, like, being sexually assaulted or cheated on or something like that, or whether it's a situation like what we're talking about right now in the space of racism. Like, oh, did they really mean that? Well, I don't know. Why do you have to make everything about race? Like, maybe they're just being mean. It's like, whoa. Hold on. How is this person the victim now when they out here bugging? And so,
why did you choose I think the question we don't normally throw back because we let those stick to us is, like, why was the first instinct for you to defend the other human when you're standing in my face, listening to my part of the story? Now, we can make it move to where you can help me understand maybe a different perspective, but your initial response to this is defense. And I think, Trevor, in my experience, I think it has more to do with about the individual we're talking to, about the individuals that we're sharing these experiences with. When you talk about whiteness, the defense is because it's too close to home, and so there's no space. I'm not heard in that space. You know, in terms of, like, in mega churches, been told, oh, maybe that didn't greet you because you're new and they didn't know who you are. I'm not an idiot. I know when someone's, like, literally ignoring me and the group of other people around. Like, I'm not looking. That's the thing. No Black person wants to look for racism in their day-to-day. I was 4 years old and had to figure out that I was a Black man. So race has always been a part of that story. So if the fact that you want to take it away from it is a privileged statement in itself. How long did I get to live in this life and not know what color my skin was? I'm glad that you've spent your whole life not having to, but to delete that from my experiences is it's a continuation of erasure. And I push against that because it's like, you're showing me that in the face-to-face with a human being, you choose defense rather than listening. And there's something there that's not about me. It's about the person that's listening and defending.
Yeah. And that you don't want to face hard truth. Like, you don't want to face, I mean, it goes back to what you were talking about in the space of white fragility. It's like, you don't want to believe this stuff is as bad as it is because you don't want to believe that this stuff is still prevalent and that you have a legacy that plays a part in this. And you don't want
personally, you're implicated.
Yeah, and you don't want to believe that you're part of the problem. It's like, if you're part of the problem, you have to come to reckon with that and become part of the solution. Because, like, here's the thing with, like, when it comes to being an ally, cause, like, if you're trying to be an ally, you gotta basically just know that you gonna F up. Like, you're gonna mess up. You're not gonna be perfect. You have to be willing to take L's and be called out, because guess what? You are not exempt from experiencing the level of racism that America has perpetuated, that the United States of America has perpetuated since the foundation of the country. You're not exempt from hearing and seeing the media that tries to demonize Black people. That you're not some sort of otherworldly being, that you don't have to experience the realities of what menstrual strokes were, or you don't have to experience the reality of, like, ad work that demonizes Black hair, or refers to long silky straight hair as the good hair, or like thin white blonde and blue eyes is the pinnacle of beauty. Or churches have been segregated or kept black people out of their midst for, decades and decades and centuries, and seminaries as well. It's like, guess what? Milligan, who owns the seminary that both Kalvin and I graduated from, and I talk about this in another episode, Milligan didn't integrate until the late 60s. So that's a part of Milligan's legacy. Milligan was a segregated school that was operating as a Christian institution. That's a part of the legacy of Milligan. That wasn't that long ago. So and Emmanuel might have been a different institution up to a couple of years ago, but it's like, there's still a legacy that you are a part of. There's a legacy of Christianity. There's a legacy of the Christian church, this denomination that Emmanuel sits within, the Stone Campbell movement, that has a racist history.
Yeah, I'm sorry, man. I don't think your ask is too much. I think if we can acknowledge that any level of privilege in a society that is capitalistic creates exceptions, and I don't have to experience certain things. If I'm from a certain socioeconomic status, I don't experience certain things, and they're outside of my realm of experience. When it comes to race, on any level, if you have white lighter skin, and to acknowledge a first step level of privilege is to know that my experience does not equate to everybody else's. That doesn't seem too much of a step. And so when you ask a Christian to say, when you say this is because of racism, and they are a white individual, the first ask is for you to listen and realize that is outside of what this society has privileged for you to live in. It's outside of your privilege. And so it's not a strong ask. It's not a big ask, but I think we do the implication in the work, Trevor, which I've talked with you about tons of times. This podcast is example of how we're willing to be a part of the work to imagine a better society. I don't think you nor I are asking for us to be deleted from any work that needs to be done, or asking that we don't need to work towards a better society. But the minimal asks have been met with defense, with avoidance, distraction, ignorance, silence. The mere small asks to even engage feel too much. And as long as they are too much, the church cannot lead anywhere in this conversation. Yeah. You can't lead. How can you lead if you're not willing to look at the least of these, to hear their stories? It's the embodiment of the gospel at its bare minimum to at least pay attention to everybody outside of all of the privilege of society. We're not Jewish. We're not men. We're not. Who did Jesus spend his time with? And so, I think. Anyways, you can guide this conversation in a different way.
No, you're good, Co.
When I wrote, we just wrote sermons for Manual, and again, being a part of a work, talking about a seminary that has flaws, but also willing to be a part of how it grows to be better and fresher and a place of imagination for people that look like us, but also people of color and also people in general. The sermon I wrote was about Judas and the implication and the defilement of land, and how the priests were just as guilty as Judas. And to me, that sermon was about racism, even though I didn't say racism a ton of times. Because what it is Judas, we demonize Judas, we label Judas racist, and then we're the priests that are looking at him, and we're guilty of the same things in Deuteronomic law. It's the same. They're guilty of the same things in land defilement. But Judas is the back character. He's the one that's thrown away from society. He's the one that we can't give any empathy to. How many sermons have you heard about Judas?
When it comes to empathy towards him, very few. Very few.
And I think that's
I've listened to a lot of sermons. I've been listening to sermons since I was 3.
Exactly. Tons of them. And can you fold through any of them? Well, I'm not saying I did something special. All I'm saying is that we have met a moment where the Bible and these stories, they have to be reimagined in a context. What are we doing if we're not thinking about how these stories lend well to our society? And I think right now that's kind of the interesting part of that. We are so cancel culture is a huge part of it too. We keep canceling everybody left and right and not realize, and if I cancel the rapist or the person that molested a ton of women and not see my own gender, not see my own issues wrapped up in that, then I'm even more, I feel like I'm even closer to being the same person. You know what I mean? And so like, I don't know. I think that was something that like I came to grips with, that like there are a lot of white people that like are so scared of being racist that they can't eat. It pushes them from not even be allowing our experiences to even be heard.
Yeah, it's dangerous. I think about that time for me, right? Like I wasn't even trying to go to seminary at Emmanuel. I was trying to
say that.
I wasn't even trying to go to seminary at Emmanuel. I was trying to move to Vancouver, British Columbia, and go to Regent College. And I don't know how Regent is in this space of conversation, but Regent was in Canada, and Vancouver was a way more diverse city. And I was aware that I wasn't in a diverse space, and I wanted to be in a city. I wanted to be in a diverse space. I felt like Vancouver was the meshing of everything I would have wanted: mountains, the ocean, and a great city with a bunch of culture and diversity and different languages and stuff like that. So it would have been like, for me, I was like, this is the effing pinnacle. I'm like,
let's go.
I'm like, wow, I'm black. Like this area is going to have like a bunch of different cultures and stuff. Seattle's down the street. I mean, they ain't got a whole lot of black people, but it's got some places I would like to be functioning in.
Yes.
And then I was like, all right. And then I'm gonna be able to shoot photo stuff. I'm gonna be able to integrate my art into like this whole, situation of what I'm doing in ministry. Like this is gonna be fire, but I had promised myself I wasn't going into debt for seminary, and so I kind of went out there on a wish and a prayer, because they only offered me like a third scholarship, even though I had a 4.3. No, not 4.3. That's a lie. That was my sister's GPA. 3.93 coming out of college, and I had done all this stuff, and I'm black, so I'm thinking I'm gonna get a full ride offer. I didn't, and so I go out there, and it doesn't work out, and I come back, and only place I could either go home or I could go to Tennessee and figure stuff out, and I didn't want to live at home, and because I had committed to like, I mean, I'm a person who wants to do my own thing, and so I went and did my own thing in Tennessee, and that was, it was a kind of big experience. It was a big move, and I think that decision dictated a lot of this stuff. I mean, it dictated me coming to Raleigh and all those other things. But I foresaw a different like transition from college, and I was aware of the things that I needed, but I felt like I was out of options, right? And so because
it seems like you were lulled into a situation that you were lulled into a situation that looked a particular way that wasn't, And
I think that God did show up and offer Emmanuel. And I think switching to Emmanuel being not an MDiv for me, so that I was just like coming in and out of a way more diverse city, even though like the church I was in wasn't diverse and the staff on the church wasn't diverse at all. I was able to be among black folk and other peoples of color, indigenous folks and stuff, because I would put myself intentionally in spaces with people who looked more like me, and people who had more of those common experiences, and all the while like continuing seminary and finishing out that degree. But like I do think there's a sense of like there's some space of God's provision in that God wanted me and you and people like Walinda,
say that.
Wanted like folks like us to be prophetic in those spaces, and like for Emmanuel to have to come to grips with some of the realities, because like the professors could be about that life all they want, but like your students got problems, and it's like and like the students have to step their game up, because like these niggas want to be pastors and stuff. Like
they do. They want to command. They want to sit in a position that historically heralds the voice of the Lord. I think that's what Elizabeth Ackermeyer calls it. That's what the pastor does. It comes from the congregation to herald some form, some spirit, some voice from the Lord, and to do that in an exclusionary space, gosh, that just seems so wrong. It just seems so wrong, and it's just, I don't know, Trev, when you were talking, I thought about like my first year, and then I thought about your first year. And I was so excited to have a brother there, at Emmanuel. But I also knew that like it was the same shock that it was to me. I thought these people were really like, not people in an othering way, but I thought that like the peers that I had, they cared, they would engage this same conversation. I wouldn't have to, these were people of faith, right? Like, why do I have to like tell you that this matters or these experiences actually exist? And to me, it just seems like we were always on a different page. I love Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, Between the World and Me, because I honestly can't tell, I can't say it better than to say we live in two different worlds.
Yeah. That's real.
Because when a black man dies and I go to class and nobody even knows his name, meeting national headlines, Trev, and nobody knows their names, at least didn't read the story. And I know these people are like up on current events, reading is the same things I'm reading, but how did this fall through the cracks?
Yeah. Yeah. I think about this too, man. I think that there was grace that like God put us in those spaces, and it's like, I don't have beef towards Emmanuel. I learned a lot of things in Emmanuel, and a lot of good and edifying things for me, and I loved my professors. I think I got a lot from a lot of those people. I definitely told them at the end that they need to work to have more diversity among that staff. But I did enjoy my experience and learned a lot. But I think that there was a sense of God's grace that there were voices like ours, like people like us embodying, who we are in those spaces. But I also think that there is something to be said about like, you don't have to do that, Black folks. You don't have to do that, people of color. You don't have to feel like it is your job to be that voice crying out in the wilderness. Unless God's calling you to that, you ain't gotta do that. I told my boys this last night, or it was either last night or 2 days ago. Two cats, Paris and Dorian. I was like, yo, I realized that like, because in the beginning of me like really becoming more awakened in the sense of like racial justice, equality for Black people, for me, it's like I was always aware that I was Black. And I was always aware that racism was a thing, and it played itself out in different ways, but I didn't have all the terminologies and things like that to communicate within the space of what we communicate now, right? I didn't have all that stuff. And so when I did start gaining that stuff, it was within college. And I told them in the beginning, for me, I spent a lot of time trying to like make white people aware that racism was popping, like, and like make them care. Like make them care, right? And I came to this position where I was like, you can like stop wasting your time trying to make racist white people care about you. And that's not all white people, but that's racist white people. It's like, stop. You're not like converting racist white people. Like trying to do that is a waste of your time, Trevor. Don't do that. Don't waste your time like that, because there are white people who are allies. There are white people who are in solidarity with you. And if you as people of color, as indigenous people, as Black people get together and make a movement, white allies are going to be alongside you. And then it's like, let's do this thing together, y'all. Like, let's rock this thing out. But if you are going to sit here and waste your energy on people who are committed to misunderstanding you, to quote Lecrae, people who are committed to not hearing you, you are wasting your energy and you're wasting your time that you could spend empowering people of color. That's why I make art to challenge perspectives and give hope to the marginalized and oppressed. Because it's like, I want marginalized and oppressed people to be empowered. Like, that's my focus. Like, shout out to everybody who's like rocking from every single color of the rainbow, right? but like, but I'm not gonna waste my energy trying to get anyone who doesn't give a damn about black people to give a damn about black people.
To give a damn. Trevor, yes, that's the thing. Like, I think the one thing that's beautiful about theological reflection and training is that on the other side of it, I think you're with me in this same thing that we, African American people, black people, which is a better black people, we get the right of life and to figure out how to live it well. I think Zadie Smith says, like, what is life and how can one live it well? Well, that's the question, right? Like, the demand of God's justice in this world means that I get to ask that question to God. I get to pose that question, and that all of our life and our interactions should not always be ridden with shame and guilt and turmoil and grief and sorrow and pain. And so for me, it's like I know for me, I've been operating out of one realm of my consciousness the majority of my life. And as the consciousness of always knowing what society views of me, how to respond to that, how to meet those expectations. The second one that Ya Boi talks about is the one where we actually think for ourselves and we know what we want to think and believe and have being and have ontological and existential crises. You know what I mean? I want to have an existential crisis. So that means that I'm living. You know what I mean? That means I'm trying to figure out what it means to actually live and to grieve and to heal. And I think I'm with you 100%. And it is a demand of God's justice to figure out what it means to ask the question, number one, but also to believe that our realized experience means that we get to live in the heaven now. We get to live in the heaven now. We get to have joy and peace and all the different things. And so that right of life is something that I'm still in like wrestling with God against, because we don't deserve for our life to be vapors, to be meaningless. And I think the God of Jacob and the God of Abraham and the God of Negroes, the God of niggas that birthed the black church, and the God that we traded for the white God that sanctioned our oppression, that God, I think that God is deeply concerned with the generations of lynching and the generations of erasure of our people. Yeah. And I think that has to be met with some type of grace and benevolence and love. And anyways, I'm not preaching, but I am saying, like, I think what you're saying is that we get to be. We don't have to choose to be in silos and in the wilderness speaking to people that don't want to listen. Yeah. Or maybe not ready to listen, right? Like, I think we have good experiences that keep us going along the way. But it's like, yeah, this is not a critique to Emmanuel, a little bit, but like more of a societal situation that, like, our teachers need to they need to diversify the syllabi. There's other people speaking. There's other people that, like, all of the students at any institution needs to hear it from. We need to hear from more black people, from more black women. Anyways, I'm just ranting.
No, you're good, man. You're good. I mean, I think it's also, it's like, you don't have to go to institutions that you're going to experience trauma on that level. And it's not like in HBCUs, like, there's not trauma. It's not like Howard's not under fire right now because of sexual assault of black women, you know? Like, it's not like those things aren't happening, but, like, you can go and find spaces where you are safe. You can go and find spaces where you are accepted. You can go and find spaces where you're not going to deal with that on the same level. It's like what you were just saying, Cal, like, when you're talking about, like, you know, my entire experience doesn't have to be like striving against oppression. It doesn't have to be striving against evil. It doesn't have to be like I'm like a voice crying out in the wilderness. And I never finished the thought of like what I told my boys. So sorry to keep y'all in suspense of that, but it's like I said, I spent so much time in my early time within this space of like trying to like convince, you know, these racist white folks to love me or to care about black people. And I realized I spent so much time crying out in the wilderness when I needed to be building a city. Yeah. And that's the thing. And I'm not going to give y'all a whole bunch of breakdown of the whole city of God and what all that means, because I don't want to. I want y'all to figure it out, because that makes art better when you have to figure it out. And listen, maybe I'll give that information in the future. But like, I needed to be building with people who cared, because people who cared, we were going to make a greater impact. We were going to make a greater impact, because it's like, all right, it's like Dr. King, right? Dr. King thought that he was going to be able to just, we talked about this, weeks ago in our conversations, just texting and stuff. Dr. King thought that he was just going to be able to show these white Christians in America during the civil rights era, that this is what we're experiencing as Black people. And they because they were God-fearing, Jesus-loving individuals, would care, and they would stand with us. And then he found out that he was wrong. And then it really rocked him. And that's when you see him talk about within his speech, or not his speech, the interview that he did like just months before his death on NBC. He says like, he realized that some of the things that he hoped for and believed within the I Have a Dream speech were a little bit naive. And he said, now I'm not one to give up hope. I'm going to keep on hoping. But I've realized that hope needs to be tempered with a solid realism. And that's a reality, cuz like, I'm not on some Marcus Garvey back to Africa type ish, and if people who are like, yo, I ain't got no problem with you. If you trying to move somewhere else and go be treated in better in a different country, more power to y'all, cuz like, I feel like my calling. I
think Ghana experience. Go ahead. No, finish.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think my calling sits more in the space of a Jeremiah to sit within the land, right, and to enrich the land that you're a part of, right. I think that's where my calling sits, at least at this point. But what I do know is that you can go to a Black institution, like you can tell your parents like, yo, there are no people who look like me around here, or there is no diversity of people, and I would like to move to a different area. Like, can we buy a house and go to a school district that has more people of color? I went to a really diverse high school, and that was incredible for me. I've got homies across all sorts of different racial, socioeconomic, sexual orientation, like all sorts of different standpoints, because of like where I went to school, of like the people I was around and experienced. But I would not have had that if I was in an autonomous location. Like, you don't have to stay there. And so to do the self-care, to be like, yo, like, even if you in the first year of college or the second year of college, you ain't gotta stay there. Like, you ain't gotta, if you are under trauma in a space, you can experience more trauma in a space that, like, that 2 years that you think you can just ride out might be something that affects you for the next 40 years of your life. And you're trying to unearth and undo in therapy for decades because of the trauma that you experienced. It's like, and so to play some space of self-care, and to know like, yo, like, just like, I don't have to be in a moment like Silent Stream. I don't have to be in a classroom like that. And I'm not saying that you're going to find anywhere in America that you can just escape from racism, because this is America, or this is the United States of America. See, I'm going back to it. I'm telling you, American acceptability.
Honestly, it was so funny, Trev. You like made the distinction between like North America, and then you made a case for saying America, and you went to like Cortez and like Central America. And I think you may have said case for South America. Hilarious. Anyways,
it's freaking difficult, man. It's freaking difficult because like
you substantiated it, so now you can say America.
Yeah, well, and see, that's the thing, yeah, because there is the reality that like that there's like, you go up and down in America and like the racism is still there, like it's still all over. But then it's also like the United States has a very distinct history, which we both are very aware of. But it's so difficult. I was listening to like this Jane Elliott thing at some point, and she was just giving like some sort of, like, it was a video that popped up on my IG feed, and it was like a 30-second joint, and she was talking about the world map and talking about how like America is like made so big, but if it was actually like, and then she like laid out like a freaking actual like geologically accurate sizing map. She's like, America is not this big. Like it's like they try to make America look like half the size of Africa, and that's not true. And it's like this American exceptionalism that comes in there. And like as soon as she was talking about that, I was like, dang, I should probably stop calling America just America. Like I should call it the United States, because like America's a lot more than the United States. Like it's North and South America, and then it's the United States of America. So I'm like, I'm trying to be like really intentional to make that distinction, and some of the ways of just being intentional with language, like a lot of the stuff that we learned in seminary, Yeah. But yeah,
I will circle back to say something really interesting. I think like you hit like home for me when you're talking about like the trauma that you incur staying at a PWI or predominantly white institution. You will need therapy for it, you know what I mean? And even in this social reality is something that just happened for me. I just quit another master's program because of where I was sitting at Milligan. You know what I mean? I withdrew a couple of days ago. So bro, I don't know if you want that rawness, this newness, this freshness on here, but
it's up to you, Ka. Talk.
Honestly, it's prophetic. I mean, it's honestly like a good word for you to even say that, because in a counseling psychology program, I chose my own mental health, and I withdrew from Milligan University like a couple of days ago. And it's like this social reality that I'm living in. I am like since March, bro, it's been an uphill battle. Story after story after story, like I'm feeling this like reminiscence of like the same stories my grandfather told me. It's just like that trauma is sitting with me, and I'm just adding experiences onto that, working at this university and going to school there. And so it's like when I withdrew, which has been one of the hardest things, I was choosing my own mental health, and I had all the language around it, right? Like after a year of study, so I grieve that, but I also celebrate you actually saying that out loud, because like we don't have to die in predominantly white institutions as academics. Like as Black academics, we do not have to die in predominantly white institutions. There are petitions right now, bro. I like literally was like looking it up the other day. There are faculty, there are graduate students that have withdrew from universities at this time to say like, no more. We will not do this. This will not stop our study. We will not stop studying, but we won't be doing it here. And so that word right there, I just wanted to celebrate that, retweet that, because that's some real shit right now. Because like, I don't know, bro, it just doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel like this Black exceptionalism is this idea that we need to embody fully. We don't need to be singularized as Black people. We don't need to even believe that freaking lie, man. I can't pump, but it's like, we don't have to ascribe to those lies anymore. And I think there's a veil that's been lifted in this time, and I'm like excited about who's moving, who's shaking, who's in the streets, bro. Like we're older now, so it's like now we have to realize that like that young generation that like we used to be the people that were speaking it out and calling it out and enraged by this social unrest. We've got teenagers that are not having it, that are getting out in the streets, that are motivating their parents, and that motivates me. That gets me like pumped. Because there's hope there, because a lot of the times I'm not hopeful. I'm not hopeful because it's too recycled. This feels too much of the same thing. But those kids in the streets right now, man, they're reminding me that like to never sacrifice or even like, what word am I trying to use? Don't sacrifice our ability to call out what's wrong. If it's wrong, it's wrong. And that while we may have to cope with it and live with it and work towards a better reality, it doesn't make it right. And their anger and angst and being upset with it should have space to breathe.
Yeah. I mean, you think about this, right? It's like, I mean, it's been 5 years since I graduated from college, which feels like a blink of an eye. But 5 years is another full college experience for me. So that means that like the 18-year-olds, like they've already gone through a cycle. Like the ones who are 18 that point, and then like, there were little homies that I had at the church. I just left at the end of 2019, who were like 18, and they are like born in 2002. I'm like, damn, like you didn't even like, you weren't even alive during 9/11. Like, that's crazy. Like, that's just a history textbook ish. But like, I also, like, even though this generation is like being exposed to a lot more of this stuff, because of like social media and stuff, I do think that like not many of them really know about the intricacies, and so they can still end up in these institutions that are going to do the same things. And it's like, you don't have to stay at that job, you don't have to stay at that institution, you don't have to stay in that club or that sports team or that school district or any, like, you can make moves to get to healthier spots. It's like, for me, it's like there's certain situations where I knew I was enduring certain things, and it was like, this is for a season, and this is for a season for me to get to and through what I need to get to in order to to come to a place of where I needed to be. It's like, I even knew, and I told LifePoint this, the church I was on staff at before this, I told them this when I came in, like, this place is like, I don't plan to be here forever. I plan for this to be a seminary job. And like, my supervisor at the time didn't, like wanted me to be there like longer than that. When I first came in, he was like, we want you here for the long haul. I was like, that is not what I said, cuh. I said I wanted to plant a church autonomously by myself. I've lost your video, Cal. You're back. Okay. And so I said, I want to plant a church autonomously by myself. Like, that's what I'm trying to do. And so, like, I didn't care what his vision was. I cared what my vision was. And like, even with the racism that I endured in that space, and I'm not saying everyone at the church and every person on staff and everything like this, that, and the third I dealt with, but like, I was 100 with them when stuff popped off. And like, I had conversations when stuff popped off. And I knew that was a moment in time for me. That was a moment throughout seminary. I knew that I was not going to be there forever. And I voiced that. And if that was a surprise to someone, they obviously weren't listening to me in the beginning, because I knew that it was like, this is just a twinkle in time. And, but at the same time, like, had a better opportunity presented itself, I would have probably left, because I had no reason to stay under longevity. I told you from the jump, I'm just here in the in-between time. I will make this place better while I'm here, as of my commitment to this space and as of my commitment to God. But I'm also totally open to anything else God wants to do. So if I would have ended up in a space where somebody else offered me a gig and offered to pay for seminary and offered the things that I had, I'd be like, cool. But I also knew, okay, like, in this moment, like, there's some things that I have going, and I'm gonna work towards where I want to be, because I asked in my first meeting, I said, what are y'all gonna do to increase the diversity of your staff? What are you gonna do to increase the diversity of your church? Like, those were questions that I asked from the beginning. I wasn't afraid of those questions, and those things didn't necessarily pan out. I didn't see those things grow throughout the time. And it's like, all right, I got to keep it moving, cuz. Like, I got places to be. And so I was on staff there like just under 3 years. But it was like,
wow.
it was a pretty long time. It was most of my seminary experience, right? But I knew what I needed. And I knew that they were paying for school. I knew that, I committed to be there for a time, and I knew that, like, I could build out a department and do good work there and learn things there. And then when I learned what I needed to learn, and I knew that I could, like, utilize the gear that I needed to use to make this project, it's like, in the midst of that space, I felt like I had a pretty decent standing, right? And then, but then when it was like, no, like, I gotta move on, like, just like I had planned to, I moved on. And so, like I said, if that's news to somebody, because, I imagine that someone from the church is like listening to this podcast, so that's news. That was stuff I voiced from the get-go. And so in the midst of it, it's just like, I do think that like there has to be an intention surrounding our health as Black people. Like your health as a Black person, your health as a person of color, your health as an Indigenous person, because like you don't have to be constantly in spaces where you feel misunderstood. Like you can identify that a problem is happening and don't feel like you don't have to be so bought in that you have to stay. Even with King, bruh, with my undergrad experience, I wanted to go to Virginia Tech from the moment I walked into that school. Yeah. I applied to Virginia Tech 2 years straight, and I tried to get into one of their most competitive programs there, the industrial design program. They only had 2 transfer spots, and I was always the rotation spot. I was the third of 2, and so if someone denied it, that they would let me come in, and that's what they told me. But that was all I had, and so it was like, you know, that didn't work out. That didn't work out. That was the only other school I wanted to go to, you know. Yeah. And sometimes I do think about what if I would have went to an art-based institution. But there were good things that happened for me at King, but I also experienced a lot of racism. And I wasn't a good enough wrestler to get like a bunch of transfer opportunities or something like that. Like I wouldn't have gotten nearly the money that I got at King. So it was like, all right, I'm gonna ride this thing out. And there were some good things, and I ended up like continuing to enjoy my educational experience. But it was also in a microcosm, but I also was experiencing a lot that I was still processing through and really, really coming to terms with. So yeah, man, I really think about like, we have to protect one another. And then we also have to make spaces that are safe, because I don't think there are enough of them for Black kids to be.
Yeah. Even introducing the conversation of health, like, do we think about our mental health? I don't know. I don't even know if a couple of years ago, I didn't get to a point of the end of myself, I would have even gotten in therapy 100%. You know what I mean? Like I got to the end of like me being able to take care of myself and do all the things right. And I just couldn't help myself anymore. And I think that there's a strong like stigma in our communities where we don't want to say like, man, I'm depressed, or I like have anxiety, because it equates weakness in a lot of ways. We're supposed to be strong. We're supposed to be resilient. We're supposed to be, again, exceptional. And I think to know that we get to not be okay is something like I am championing. It's something that's always a part of my writing. It's something that's always a part of like what I'm thinking. It's like, what can I provide more spaces for Black people and people of color to think that your mental health is just as important to your well-being as anything else? It's just the option for it. Do we get that option? Do we get the option of life? And I think that's why I keep asking that question. Like, to have mental health issues is to have the option to live and breathe and not be okay, and to feel emotions, and to be not one Black person, but this Black person. You know what I mean? Like, it's just interesting because I find I hit so many walls when we talk about mental health. It's like, oh, I don't need those things, or that's not going to help me. And it's like, I just want to create the space for you to like, to reject this, but also let it stay in your orbit. You know what I mean? Because if we can just introduce it, if we can just have more conversations where we're like, if I can even be the most vulnerable person, being like, man, I get depressed. I get depressed every day, as we should be. It's depressive to know that like your life is meaningless, and people, Black men, die younger than you and of your age on a consistent basis.
Meaningless to some people, not meaningless in the sense, but like some people view us as.
But it feels like that.
Yeah.
It feels like that at the moment. It feels like your life is meaningless. You know, maybe for me, that's what it is. That's what lulls us into depression. The language we use, the ways we think about it, the weaknesses we think about. If we think about being low as a weakness, then like we're just gonna attack that and not like heal in that moment. You know, so. It's something we need to keep talking about. It's something we need to introduce and keep talking about, like what is your mental health like, and even trying to like look at the way that we can care for ourselves better. And that's one way we can.
Yeah. I think about, I said this on the Process Place episode of Durag Thoughts this season, of like, for me, it's been like when I get my money right, you know, that like I plan to like go see a therapist and just rock through some of the stuff that it means to be Black in America, and then like some of the trauma that I've experienced in my life, and some of the situations in these different institutions, churches, you know, like institutions in terms of like schools, you know, moments like this one, also like stuff I experienced as a kid, and some of the trauma that goes in there, you know, stuff with my pops, which is, you know, the narrative that comes before, you know, coming into this season. Like, you know, Brave Boulevard was about my pops and stuff, and like, y'all, if you paid attention to the project, you've seen some of that. And so it's like I fully plan to do that, and it's just like it's a matter of guap right now.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's difficult in our communities. Like, we have so often been pushed into these like very generalized situations where, you know, we overuse drugs, and we're our own problems because we overuse other stimulants. But those are coping mechanisms, and any mental health professional would say that. But it's because of like all these other interlocking things that we don't even get the option to think about that.
Yeah.
What would it be like for us to say like our alcoholic uncle at the barbecue, or like our you know, the family member that we don't talk about that are addicted to certain things? Like, what would it be like to just label those as coping mechanisms with this reality? Like, how much freer and how much space could we hold for them? I think for me, as a when I was working as a therapist intern, I was just kind of like always very interested in like addiction and how that affects our brains, how it affects how we think about each other, our history of addiction in this country. We didn't even really start doing good work in addiction therapy until like we stopped making it just Black people's problems. Black people are the ones that get addicted to things. And then they did an ACE study a few years ago and found out that middle white class people have a proclivity to be addicted to certain things.
Yeah,
it's genetic, or go ahead.
Well, it's statistically proven. Like Duke did a study a couple years ago that white youth are twice as likely as Black youth to consume drugs. Like, and like black youth were actually of the lowest. That even, you know, Latinx youth were more likely than us. And so it's like, which I think is a testament to our resolve, even that we are less likely with all the stuff we go through in this country, what it means to be Black in this country, and we are less likely to use drugs. Bro, that's crazy.
It's wild. And then to be blamed for it, you know what I mean? The war on drugs it locked up a majority of Black and brown youth. And so it's so interesting when you kind of like, when you peel back the layers to understand what's like on the surface. Like, I think there's always, that's a therapy's phrase, there's always more under the surface. There's always more under what we say. And I think for us, it's like right now, mental health is like, how are we even breathing? Like, how are we even moving? How are we even able to have this conversation? Because it just feels intolerable in a global pandemic. Black people are Black and brown people are disproportionately affected by this like these health concerns, like these health depravities. Like, it's like there's so much happening. Like, how could you not expect all of university students to be flooding their counseling services? Or like, if that's the case, then don't we get, as Black people, Black and brown people, don't we get to like be not okay? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I just want that to like be, I want to put that on a poster trip so bad and be like, it's okay to not be okay. Like, just playing front and center. If that was just something we could let into our orbit, I think that would be a step, because there's so many people I say that to, and they're like, okay, here you go with this mojo, this voodoo.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's also, you know, needed to be said that like your first therapist might not be the best therapist for you. It's
definitely.
It's like Lecrae said something recently that I thought, and I've talked about this elsewhere on this Direct Thoughts season. It's like Lecrae's album that just dropped, Restoration, just coincidentally has some like parallels in certain aspects to City of God. Lecrae was in a much darker space than I was, but like you know, because like Lecrae was ready to jump off the deep end and was like just going through a whole bunch of stuff and like but for me, like there's certain like points of like themes and stuff that he touches on in certain words and stuff that he uses and certain phrasing that I'm like, there's some weird parallels and we ain't even talk. Like I know some of your people, but like we ain't talk. Like I'm not on that playing field. But yeah, Cray was talking about, because he's been in therapy for the last 2 years, and he's like, it's like you gotta date therapists like you would date a significant other. Like he's like sometimes the first one ain't it. Like you gotta figure out the right therapist, and that's real, because like we talk about therapy a lot, but it kind of feels like this narrative where it's like therapy, like once you just get in, you Gucci, you've taken this massive step and you're there. It's like, yes, you've taken a massive step and it's awesome, and I'm so glad that you're taking a step, but this person might not be the right person for you. Like
mental health providers are not created equal. Exactly. They are not created equal.
Exactly. And on 100, like I was asked to speak at Milligan to a group of like people who were in the program that Kalvin was, about like racism and stuff, and like it was clear the levels that people understood stuff. Like there were some people who were like moderately more woke, and people who didn't know anything, and people who were just taking notes and were like, well, how do I do this, or what do I do, like, or people who were just bugging. And so it's like you can have a mental health professional, you know, who's just talking out of pocket. Like it's very, very possible. And so to like date spaces, which this is why people go on college trips, right? But I ain't never do that. And so, because like I just didn't have the grades and stuff, that I didn't have a bunch of places to look at. And I think I was just going through so much in that time frame, because like junior year is like the time where you're like, you know, visiting colleges and thinking through all that stuff. I didn't necessarily have any place to look at. And I was going through so much in my life that I was just wrestling that summer. Like I didn't know what to look forward to next. But it's like, there's a reason why you visit colleges. There's a reason why you know, date different people before you settle on a person, you know, or date someone and at least have an understanding of your standards of like what you want, and that person can turn out to be the individual that you're looking for. There's a reason why, you know, you taste different things and figure out what you like. There's a reason why you try out different sports, and there's a reason why you try out things to figure out where you sit. And so a therapist could be telling you some crazy stuff, and those are therapists you gotta let go.
And if 70% of the success of therapy, of like talk therapy, is the client therapist relationship, of course it matters who you choose and where that work comes from, like who that work is with. Like there's honestly, bro, from experience, I had like a couple therapists and I was just trying it out. And I had this one therapist that finally, like, she asked me these questions, bro, and she spoke so much truth back to me. Asked the right questions, just paid attention to me, and spoke so much back to me that, like, the healing that happened she was a white woman, you know? And it was like, I was in there talking about, like, my real trauma as it dealt with, like, personally, events in my life, my divorce, like my all of my different things. Like we were talking about we reached the gamut, but like her ability to hold space for me honestly was the best thing she could have ever done for me. But it was her veracity, or the truth that she laid down as foundation to our relationship. Like she said one time to me in therapy, she said, I will never have the experience you have as a Black man. And I also honor the space that you have allowed me to hear this part of your story. She stopped all theory, all the right questions. She stopped to say that. And that's when I began to trust her. And so we moved to a whole different place because of like her ability to have those skills, those helping skills that they teach us, to be true to that relationship, to maintain fidelity to it, to honor what the client brings in. And you're right, bro. I'm so glad you brought that up. Like, and it's so funny that you have that perspective. You didn't even say you've had experience in therapy, but to say that, to know like, hey, we can talk about therapy, but you also need to say like, vet your therapist. It's not you. Maybe sometimes it can still be them. And so find the person you rock with, and find the person that like challenges you, and does what you, I mean, it is about the relationship. So I'll stop rambling.
No, you're good, bro. You're good. I've definitely been to, like, there was a time when I had come out. So I talk about this in the Process Place episode as well, but, my mom had us go to like group therapy a couple times when I was a little kid about some of the stuff we were rocking through in the household with my pops and stuff like that. And I was the emotional cat who was talking all the time and like breaking down crying, because that's just who I am. I'm an emotional nigga. And then I think, well, and then like there was a point where like I was bugging in like junior year and senior year of high school just because of all the stuff that I was going through, which I kind of alluded to. And my mom had me start going to just spend time with the one of the pastors. And so I would call it pastoral counseling rather than therapy, because I don't think he was a licensed therapist. But it was a male figure in my life for, you know, someone to bounce off some of the stuff I was rocking through with. And then after college, I went to a pastor as well, who was like a counselor on staff at a church. And I went and I said, I just want to get a feel for, like, I want to make sure there's like nothing that's like an issue in the space of like what has to do with my pops. And honestly, it wasn't a good appointment, because like he basically said, if, you know, basically like the stuff that happens to you in your life, like you seem like you're doing all right. So like you can either let it define you, or you can kind of like rock past it. And so we never
blamed you for what was happening.
Well,
and in no way does that help you.
Well, and I don't feel like he blamed me. I felt like he was like, you're doing all right. And so he was basically like, you don't need to give that more energy than it's worth type thing. So he didn't even like walk into like peering into like, well, let's unearth some stuff. And that's how I could tell like he was a pastoral counselor and not a therapist. And so, but it was free, and I was making $11,000 a year at the time. So like, you know, and so I didn't go back to therapy from that point. And even in like, you know, I definitely could have afforded therapy when I was working full time at that church and while I was making this project, but it wasn't something that I did. And so for me, it's like I said before, you know, a couple minutes ago, it's like, when the guap is right, I'm gonna, of course, be in there. And my brother says to me all the time, he thinks that like part of reparations for Black people should be therapy, because what it means to be Black in America is like there's a lot of stuff we go through. Like we go through a lot of shit. We go through some heavy shit, and I say that intentionally. I use words intentionally, and I use that very intentionally. It's like,
I know you do.
And so, like, you gotta understand, people, like that there's trauma that we endure that other folks don't necessarily endure in this country in the same way. And so, and I'm not saying that people who aren't Black don't need therapy. I'm saying a whole lot of people need therapy. And I think that when it comes to Black folks,
some papers in research, they call it like a complex trauma, that it has so many interlocking aspects or extraneous factors. If we can acknowledge that genetics plays into like how trauma can be passed on even in genes, the history of our ancestors in this country, the history, the stories we carry with us, it's just they call it a much more complex trauma because of like all of the varying experiences and extraneous factors that go along with it. So it is very much supported in the research, especially by a lot of clinicians and psychologists. And so it's just something I wish we talked. We just need to talk about it more, And I honestly said that the pastor blamed you because he put that ball back in your court. He said that you were responsible for this in some way, that you had control over what happened to you. And I just don't think that was the case. You know what I mean? So many times we need this space to even come to a place of autonomy, to have control of our narrative, to even narrate it from our point of view. That if we're not given that space, how can you find autonomy in your body and with your choices and with your life? You don't know your story well enough to own it. And so I think the best thing, my theory of choice has always been narrative therapy, just because I think with people of color, when we talk about like our stories, a lot of the time we are detached from them because we've had to keep going. There's always been something much more important to do or pay attention to in the midst of trauma, in the midst of our experiences. And so given space to truly walk through a timeline of events, to walk through our experiences and also be a part of those experiences is completely vital. There's nothing more important than that. Because if you own every part of your story and you know what happened and you walk away with it, and it's from your point of view, Trev, there's just a better way we move through the world, because at that point we've taken back our lives, we've taken back our stories. And I think that's when we can begin to become in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So basically, I think there's two things. It's like, one, it must be recognized that like to overlook racism in in situations just like what we're talking about in the space of what this track is embodying, that narrative, right? Is that like that's sinful. Like that is sin. Like it's not just this concept of like, oh, Kalvin and Trevor got hurt by something, right?
Right.
It's like that issue was sinful. And so that must be addressed. And then the other aspect of all of this stuff that must be kept in mind is like Black folks, people of color, indigenous peoples, like take care of yourselves. Like you can like aim for and make space for yourselves in your lives, in your institutions, like to do things that are healthy for you. And then like trauma is not something you should process alone, and getting some therapy is not an evil thing. Like we both champion that. And so, I hope this conversation has been fruitful to y'all. Cal, I appreciate you taking the time to rock with me.
And yeah, thanks for letting me be a part of it, man. This has been amazing.
Yeah, dog, super dope. And so all of y'all who are watching this, appreciate y'all. Catch you on the flip. Stay tuned for Monday when the next video is going to drop, and it kind of continues this story of like this evening and what me and Cal and some others are rocking through. And then tune in for next Friday, a week from today, where we're gonna rock through the next episode of Durag Thoughts, that breaks down the track that drops on Monday, or really breaks down some themes and some conversations surrounding it. And I'll catch y'all on the flip. Be easy.
Thanks for letting me be a part of it, Trev.
Yeah, dog. Peace.